Though the night had passed, shadows were cast across the decrepit ground by the light from Sugar Cube Corner. In some part of her mind, Twilight noted that the presence of light was not only unnerving in all of itself, but also accented by the eerie silence. Perhaps she had simply grown used to the effects of daytime, or perhaps the light that could banish unnatural darkness was itself quite unnatural. Even Dash, normally fidgety, after only a few moments of standing still, was silent and unmoving next to her. The two mares stood in silence, not sure what to do next. It wasn't the frantic silence from their sprint through the Everfree Forest, but very different. Twilight couldn't put her hoof on how one absence of sound could feel so different from another until it clicked. It was the silence of a predator stalking its prey. The creak of floorboards reverberated throughout the building, just a few yards away from the mares. Twilight knew that was what was coming before it happened, but didn't know how to stop it. This was what they came for, but for one moment of panic, it was also the last place on Equestria that Twilight wanted to be. She closed her ears and eyes as the hoofsteps stopped, followed by the rustling of a stubborn doorknob. As the door swung open and poured over Twilight's face, she forced her fears down and tried to quiet her nerves. A moment later, Pinkie Pie was standing in the doorway, and the chance to leave had passed. Pinkie blinked once, only half her face visible as the light was behind her, before her face split from ear to ear in a grin. "Girls!" she squealed, dashing out at them. Twilight instinctively recoiled, but it did nothing to abate the fury of Pinkie's embrace. Her face was squished together with a squirming dashes as Pinkie nuzzled them both. Before she could utter a single word, Twilight's world tumbled into chaotic motion and light. Shaking her head to clear the dizziness, she found herself seated in the storefront, with an equally dazed Dash by her side, and Pinkie across the table. Even in the light, Twilight was able to get a good look at her pink friend. When they had last parted ways, her mane had been straighter than a razor, but now it was poofy and bouncy as ever. The dirt and soot marks had been cleaned off her face and body, and even the interior of the store looked good as new. The display case had been polished to a mirror sheen, despite the lack of any baked goods to display. Twilight tried to turn the situation over in her head, while Pinkie stared at them both silently, grinning ear to ear. On the one hoof, she almost could have believed she was back in her Ponyville. On the other, there was one minor detail that kept her worried. In the middle of the store, going through a hole in the ceiling into Pinkie's room above, was a 2-story pile of rocks. With a sideways glance, Twilight could see Dash's gaze was also fixed on the rock pile, and the bench underneath them both rattled quietly from their shivers. With Dash obviously not doing so well in the situation, Twilight returned her gaze to Pinkie. "I can handle this," Twilight thought. "It's almost as if we're back home." "So," Twilight began, breaking the silence. "Step 1. Break the ice. Check." "It's good to see you again, Pinkie. How are you? I mean, are you all right?" Pinkie's grin had never faltered since they had arrived, and as Twilight peered out, it had grown even wider. Some part of Twilight wondered what would happen the day Pinkie's smile really did grow too big for her face. Another part of her worried that she was about to find out. "Oh," Pinkie said. Twilight waited a moment, unsure if she should see anything. "My." Pinkie was now visibly vibrating. Dash had frozen, and Twilight's mind began to think of pregnant silences. "Celestia!" Twilight logically couldn't have exploded into confetti, but to Twilight it looked like she certainly did. A moment later, Pinkie's face was leaning over the table, mere inches away from the two startled mares. "You're really here! Oh my gosh, oh my gosh! I haven't seen you in forever! Where have you been? I looked all over town for you. Well, okay, maybe mostly I just looked around here for you, but I still looked. Wait, why did you wait so long to come visit again?" Twilight and Dash looked at each other, and it was Dash who cautiously lifted a hoof. Because last time we were here you kinda tried to kill us? Twilight was terrified that a lot of things could happen. Mr. Slide could begin to rumble, or Pinkie's hair could suddenly go straight. But to her relief, the pink pony just giggled. Oh, yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what I was thinking. I was a little Coco in the Loco, if you know what I mean. Twilight's brow arced, not bothering to try rolling that one around in her head. It was a familiar reaction to Pinkie's antics, and on the same level, Twilight found it refreshing. Confusing, perhaps, but at least it was familiar. But I was all, you should be nicer to ponies. And he was all, rawr, I'm made of rocks. But after I realized how silly he was, and how silly I was for being, so I decided to stop being so silly, and just be fun, like normal. Twilight blinked. Missing even a moment of Pinkie's stories was enough to get you lost. Another breath of fresh air. She looked at Dash, whose gaze flickered back and forth from the rock pile nervously. Who did what now? After we left, she argued with the rocks and then rebuilt the store again, Dash whispered, her voice more hushed than it necessarily had to be. For a moment, Twilight wondered why she was so uncomfortable before she remembered her situation, chuckling a little to herself. Well, Pinkie, I'm glad to see you're doing so much better, and the store looks a lot better as well. Thanks, Twilight. I put a lot of work into keeping it clean every day, just like the cakes taught me to. Too bad I don't have anything to actually sell, but it works out, because no pony ever wants to buy anything. Well, except Mr. Slide, but he never has any bits anyway. Pinkie lifted her hoof across her mouth, as if considering something, and Twilight found herself smiling. Well, they do say the laughter is contagious, Twilight thought. Sure, Pinkie was still talking about her rocks as if they were alive, and it was true that not everything was quite right, but Twilight's imagination was quick to remind her of all the ways it could have been much, much worse. Truth be told, they had no way of knowing if Pinkie would even still be here, or if she had her element. Twilight perked up, straightening out her back. She had come here with a purpose, and although it was good to see everything going so well, she had to put business first. Pinkie, we actually came back because all of Ponyville in fact, need your help with something. Pinkie smiled, her hair bouncing as she stuck her head forward. Oh, Twilight, you know I always love to help. Remember that time I threw you a party, and you never ever knew because you were getting one? Oh, hey, does somebody else need a party? Because I could totally go for a party right now. Twilight smiled. If she was being honest with herself, she could really use a party herself. Now that was a rare thought. She made a mental note to talk to Pinkie again after this was all over. Twilight's vision had suddenly become blocked by a blue leg. She almost screamed in surprise as she tumbled backwards out of her chair, catching herself as she realized it was only Rainbow Dash, jumping on the table. Rainbow, what are you doing? The Pegasus ignored her, advancing as much as she could towards the startled party pony. All right, Pinkie, I don't know what you're up to, but we need your element of harmony. Just tell us whether or not you have it, so we can leave. Twilight reached up to grab her friend, pulling the Pegasus and the table down on top of her. As they scuffled on the ground, Twilight hissed, Dash, what the hell are you doing? Dash kicked away from Twilight and stood, backing away from both mares. There's something funny here, Twilight. Let's just get what we came for and go. Rainbow Dash, you're being rude. Pinkie, I'm sorry about this. It really was great to see you again, and relax. I don't know what's gotten into her. Twilight struggled to upright the table, looking up worriedly at Pinkie. The Earth Pony was only smiling, looking pityingly at the Pegasus. Oh, it's okay. I know we didn't really leave on the best of terms. I'm sorry, but I don't have my element anymore. He does. Twilight followed Pinkie's outstretched hoof, her gaze settling on the colossal rock tower. As if in recognition of her presence, a single pebble tumbled to the floorboards. Dash hovered over Twilight, leaning in towards her ear. Twilight, listen. This is even creepier than last time. We need to get out of here. We can come back for it later. Rainbow, what's wrong with you? Twilight gave her friend an appraising eye, noting that her tremors from earlier clearly hadn't stopped. Rainbow's forehead was wet with sweat, and her eyes were wide with near panic. She shifted rapidly from hoof to hoof, her eyes darting between Twilight, Pinkie, the rocks, and the door. Twilight's head cocked, and her eyebrows arched, caught between concerns and confusion. Rainbow, look. Pinkie is clearly doing much better than last time we saw her. It's warm and bright in here, and you want to go back out there without even taking Pinkie or her element with us? Rainbow stopped fidgeting as much, her ears drooping a little as she calmed down. Twilight smiled and nodded to her friend. Look, let's just relax and stay here a while. Make sure that Pinkie is okay before we bring her back with us. We also need to figure out how we're going to get that necklace out of Mr. Slide. The rocks, Dash corrected. Whatever, Twilight countered, a little annoyed at the hostility. Turning back to Pinkie, she found her smile instantly returned. Something about the pink filly was just putting her in a good mood today. Pinkie, do you think Mr. Slide will let us have the necklace? Huh, I don't know. He certainly never gave me any of his rocks. But I also never asked him. Why would I need rocks anyway? I mean, besides to give to him. And I've given him a lot of rocks. But it wouldn't really make sense to borrow rocks that I gave to him anyway. Twilight looked at Rainbow Dash, who had scooted, perhaps unconsciously, towards the door. The Pegasus was still twitchy, but had calmed down some now that the conversation was moving. What do you need it for? Twilight smiled, enjoying the fuzzy glow that seemed to persuade the room. Oh, the same thing as last time, I guess. We have to save New Ponyville from, Nightmare Moon, Dash finished, her eyes locking accusingly on Twilight's. Listen to yourself, Twilight. Something is up, and the sooner you admit it... It was just a slip of the tongue, Dash. Twilight felt her forehead pulse with an impending headache. With some bitter irony, she noted that Dash was proving to be a bigger problem than Pinkie was. Well, that's silly, Pinkie scoffed, rolling her eyes and ignoring the Pegasus. Nightmare Moon is gone. Duh, Twilight thought. I know what you're talking about. Twilight smacked herself in the face with a hoof, as Pinkie and Dash both cocked their heads at her. Pinkie, Nightmare Moon is still at large with her army right outside New Ponyville. Or maybe even inside. New Ponyville? Why did we get a new one? I like the old one. We got a new one because the old one was burned down, Twilight said without missing a beat. Talking with Pinkie was like playing a competitive game. Half the skill was learning to adapt to your opponent's moves on the fly. Don't be silly, Twilight. We're in Ponyville right now. Twilight looked around. Pinkie really had done a remarkable job recreating Sugar Cube Corner, but it was still only a recreation. The town around them was nothing but ruins and cinders, but, well, technically, they were still in Ponyville. Rainbow Dash pushed past Twilight, hissing at her. If you aren't going to ask, then I will. Clearing her throat before Pinkie, Dash spoke a little more loudly than necessary. Pinkie, Ponyville is ruined, and Nightmare threatens your friends. Will you help us or not? Pinkie bounced out of her chair, matching Dash's stance and voice. Ponyville's fine, thank you very much. Not that you'd know since you left. Something in the back of Twilight's mind began to tickle. Look outside, Pinkie. All you can see is scorch marks and rotted grass. Pinkie sprinted to the window, pressing her face against the glass. In an instant, she was back, shaking her head. Dashy, you're acting all kinds of weird today. It's the middle of the night. I can't see anything. Duh. Twilight rolled her eyes at Dash. In the space of a second, the blue Pegasus was in her face. Twilight, get a hold of yourself. It's not night. It's day. This is day now because Nightmare Moon is in control of Ponyville, and Ponyville is gone. Pretending otherwise won't bring it back. Twilight stepped back, her mouth open in shock. It wasn't Dash's words that had shocked her, but her face. Her eyes had gone red and puffy as they began to leak tears. Her voice croaked with every word. Twilight stood up for a moment, only Dash's chokes breaking the silence. That is, until the giggles began. Oh, Dashy, you're so random. Pinkie had jumped back into the chair, chuckling at the scowling Pegasus. Twilight ignored her, looking at her friend's panicked face. She was scowling, true, but Twilight had been around her long enough to recognize her defense mechanisms. Dash's eyes were always what betrayed her, and although her teeth were bared in anger, her eyes were wide and pleading. Twilight recognized not only fear, but concern. "No, Pinkie, she's right." Twilight smiled at Dash, who let out a deep breath. "I want everything to go back to the way it was, but staying here, waiting for customers that will never come, and talking to your rocks isn't going to bring it all back." Twilight looked at Pinkie. The Earth Pony was still smiling, but her eyes lost their smile as her glance flickered between the two mares. "I don't know what you're talking about," she managed to say through her grin. "Yes, you do, Pinkie. How many times have you rebuilt Sugar Cube Corner?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Rainbow Dash stepped forward. "You said you remembered trying to kill us. Why did you do that?" Pinkie pushed herself away from the table, trying to laugh, smile, and talk at the same time. "I don't know what you're talking about. Ponyville is fine, and I get lots of customers, and Mrs. and Mr. Cake are both alive, and I laugh and laugh every day, and you can't take that away from me." Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. In one moment, Pinkie had stood up from her chair and flipped the table towards Rainbow and Twilight. Twilight's first instinct was to deflect it with her magic, only to too late realize that she had no longer use of her magic. Dash, on the other hoof, had been ready for anything since they had walked through the door. And the first thing to hit Twilight was not the accelerating furniture, but rather her friend as she was pushed out of the way. Even as she hit the floor, Twilight was scrambling to her hooves, her gut already telling her what would happen. She whipped around to Pinkie as soon as she could, but the pink mare already had her head buried inside the rock pile. Her head snapped back up as Twilight gathered air to yell, but the sight of the piano wire in Pinkie's mouth stole the gasp right back out. There was an earth-shaking groan from above, but Twilight didn't stop there. Turning on her front hooves, she bucked wildly at the tabletop, letting the blue blur escape from underneath. She spared a final look towards Pinkie as Rainbow Dash hit her chest, carrying them both towards the door. Pinkie's eyes locked with tears, seeming to freeze the moment in time. Her forced grin had finally vanished, her jaw hanging slack and her mane halfway deflated. A boulder fell between them both, crashing through the floorboards and blocking their view of each other. Time seemed to return to normal, just in time for Twilight to hit the front door with full force. If she had any air in her lungs, it was firmly knocked out of her by that point. Her crash into the ground moments later just seemed like a cruel kick from fate, and she could do nothing but lay stunned for several moments. She could feel the rise and fall of Dash's chest on her own as she desperately tried to inhale, but she could do little more than listen to the deafening symphony of falling stones. Her hooves and sides were impacted several times by debris, but their fall had hurt her more than any of the stinging debris. As her vision began to spot the lack of oxygen, her lungs finally responded to her brain's urgent messages. With a gasp for fresh air, her legs also regained enough strength to roll Dash off of her. "Ugh," Dash mumbled as she hit the ground, her hooves jerking in the dirt. "Wait, what? Twilight, are you okay?" "Fine," she choked out as she rolled over, coughing to the ground. She spared a smile to Dash as her friend leaned in, both their faces covered in dirt. "Thanks." "Don't mention it," Dash huffed, wincing as she spread her wings. "What happened to Pinkie?" Twilight caught her breath long enough to properly sit up, her eyes looking back towards the rubble behind them. With the building destroyed, the beacon of light had vanished, and Twilight was left utterly blind after a few yards in every direction. Rainbow Dash's ears perked up towards the rubble, catching a sound that was out of place. A moment later, the unmistakable sound of a sniffle returned. Dash looked down at Twilight, who nodded her assent. Twilight stood cautiously and began to pick her way through the rocks toward the noise. With a careful flap of her wings, Dash took the lead to find the stablest boulders to climb over. It took a moment, but the silhouette of Pinkie was unmistakably found when she entered Twilight's field of vision. She sat staring towards the sky, her back to Dash and Twilight as she choked back sobs. Even when Twilight stumbled next to her and alighted herself on the other side, the darkness around them made all further distinction impossible. "You were right," Pinkie stated. To Twilight, Pinkie's voice never sounded so empty. "I couldn't just laugh it all away. I just wanted to smile again." "Pinkie, it's okay," Twilight interrupted. "No hard feelings, okay? You're our friend, and we're here to help you through this." Twilight gestured to the horizon with a hoof, though she wasn't sure Pinkie could see anyway. "Yeah," Rainbow added. "There's still stuff to smile about. Most of our friends are still alive, and in one piece, for one." "That's not what I mean, Go Girls. Though, who could laugh in a world like this? Who would want to? There's no place for laughter in Ponyville. So I made my own Ponyville. And maybe I wasn't happy, but at least I wasn't sad." Pinkie choked back another sob, and Twilight tried to see Dash over the bowed mare's head. "You guys go ahead and save the world, but I can't help. I have nothing left to laugh about." For a long moment, the three mares just sat and stared into space together, the silence split by Pinkie sniffles. It was Twilight who first raised her head, clenching her jaw. "No. Pinkie, you were the one who taught me that hiding from your fears doesn't work. You have to face them, and laughter is the best tool to help you with that." "Twilight, those were trees. There were no ghosties to laugh at here. It's real monsters now. It doesn't matter. If you stop laughing at what scares you, then that's when you let fear win, and pretty soon you won't be able to laugh at anything. We might not be able to lie to ourselves. We're in a lot of trouble, and the odds are slim, but that just makes it more important that we keep on smiling." "You can laugh at how ridiculous it is, if nothing else," Dash offered. "I mean, you tried to kill us twice now, with an avalanche, from inside a house. I mean, I saw it all happen, and it still seemed absurd." The sniffles quieted a little. "I guess it's a little funny," Pinkie admitted. "See?" Twilight said. "If any of us can bounce back from this craziness, it's you, Pinkie. Just give it a shot." Pinkie drew in a slow breath, stumbling slowly to her hooves atop the shifting rubble. Drawing in a deep breath, she leaned forward. "Ha!" she shouted into the darkness. In the heavy silence, it didn't even echo. "That, wasn't exactly what I meant," Twilight chuckled. From the other side of Pinkie, she could hear Dash begin to snicker. Pinkie jerked her head between the two mares before falling back down on her rump. After a moment, she coughed in what was almost veiled mirth. "I guess that was a little silly." "Pfft, just a little," Rainbow said before collapsing into laughter. "I didn't mean, literally laughing at..." Pinkie looked at the mares on either side of her as they collapsed into laughter. They might have partially been laughing at her, but Pinkie knew that they were just trying to help. As she listened to them laugh, she felt her lips curl upwards into a big, warm bubble began to rise in her chest. And then, more naturally than anything she had felt in a long time, she was back into a fit of giggles, her mane reinflating as she rolled around with her friends. "Thanks to you guys," she managed to say between laughs. "I think I really needed this." "Yeah, believe me, we know," Dash chuckled as she got back up. "But hey, we can't hang here all day. We've got work to do." "It's good to have you back, Pinkie." Twilight smiled as she got to her hooves. "It really, really is." Pinkie rolled over to her hooves, standing up suddenly. She pawed the ground in a few spots, darting around until something seemed to catch her eye. Pushing the rocks aside, her head darted down and emerged with something small and golden. Fastening the brooch around her neck in one motion, she smiled at her dumbstruck friends. "It's kind of funny, actually," she giggled. This was the first rock I gave Mr. Slide. I wanted to laugh so bad that I thought that having laughter as a friend would help. The harder it is to laugh, the bigger I tried to make him. And I think I kind of lost sight of the core after a while. When Pinkie walked back to her friends, Twilight pulled her into a hug. That's fine, Pinkie. You found it again now. And now, we've got everything we came for. Mission accomplished, girls. Pinkie giggled and Dash cheered, and Twilight began to pick her way out of the rubble. Dash began to turn away as well, but halted mid-step. Hey, Pinkie? Yes, Dashy? I heard you sniffling before. Well, I mean, obviously we heard you. But I thought, 'cause you weren't trying to hide it. Look, what I'm trying to say is, just because you're the element of laughter, doesn't mean you're not allowed to cry. Pinkie stood still for a moment, her eyes moistening. Thanks, Dashy. Rainbow turned away to follow Twilight, and Pinkie's smile grew wider. It was a new type of smile, a sad smile, but it was a smile nonetheless.